The year was 480 BC, and across the known world, a single name struck terror into the hearts of kings and commoners alike. Not Alexander, not Caesar, not any of the conquerors you might expect. This name belonged to a man who claimed dominion over the very elements themselves, who commanded the largest army the ancient world had ever assembled, and who believed himself to be the earthly representative of the divine. His name was Xerxes, and he was coming for Greece. But here's what Hollywood won't tell you about the man who faced down 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. The real Xerxes wasn't the golden-skinned giant from your favorite action movie. He wasn't a cartoon villain obsessed with chains and piercings. The truth about this Persian king is far more complex, far more human, and infinitely more terrifying than any Hollywood portrayal could ever capture. Today, we're stripping away 4 centuries of myth and propaganda to reveal the authentic story of Xerxes the Great, the man who inherited the largest empire on earth, who wrestled with divine visions that tormented his sleep, and who launched an invasion so massive it changed the course of Western civilization forever. By the time we're finished, you'll understand why this Persian king deserves to be remembered not as a comic book villain, but as one of history's most consequential rulers. The story begins not with Xerxes himself, but with the impossible weight of legacy crushing down on his shoulders. Picture this. You're the son of Darius the Great, the king who transformed Persia from a regional power into a continental empire stretching from India to the Mediterranean. Your father built roads that connected civilizations, created administrative systems that governed millions, and established Persian dominance over dozens of conquered peoples. Now imagine that on his deathbed, he hands you one final mission. Finish what I started. Punish the Greeks who dared defy Persian authority. Complete the conquest of Europe itself. This was the burden that fell to Xerxes around 518 BC, born into a world where failure wasn't just personal disgrace, but cosmic disorder. In Persian ideology, the king wasn't merely a political leader, but the earthly agent of Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of light and truth. Royal blood didn't just carry political authority, but divine mandate. Every decision Xerxes made wasn't simply strategic calculation, but sacred duty. The path to power, however, was anything but guaranteed. Despite being Darius's chosen successor, Xerxes faced immediate challenges to his legitimacy that would have destroyed lesser men. His older half-brother Artabazanes possessed a compelling argument for succession. As Darius's eldest son, traditional inheritance laws seemed to favor his claim. The dispute reached such intensity that Darius himself remained uncertain about the decision, seeking counsel from an unlikely source. Enter Demaratus, a former Spartan king living in Persian exile. This Greek royal, who had fled his homeland after losing a power struggle, now found himself advising the Persian throne on matters of succession. His recommendation proved decisive. Demaratus argued that Artabazanes might be older, but Xerxes held a crucial advantage. He was born after Darius became king, making him a prince from birth rather than a commoner elevated to royalty. More importantly, his mother Atossa carried the bloodline of Cyrus the Great, the legendary founder of the Persian Empire. The irony wasn't lost on contemporary observers. A Spartan exile had helped determine who would lead the invasion of Greece, setting in motion events that would ultimately bring Persian and Greek forces into mortal conflict. Demaratus had unknowingly chosen the man who would march against his former countrymen, transforming personal exile into historical consequence. When Darius died in 486 BC, Xerxes ascended to the throne without significant opposition. But the crown brought immediate crises that would test every aspect of his leadership. The Persian Empire wasn't simply large, it was impossibly vast, containing dozens of different peoples, languages, and cultures held together primarily by military force and administrative efficiency. Any sign of weakness from the center could trigger rebellions across the periphery. Egypt struck first. The ancient kingdom had never fully accepted Persian rule, maintaining its own religious practices and cultural identity despite decades of foreign domination. When news of Darius's death reached the Nile Delta, Egyptian nobles saw opportunity in transition. They declared independence, expelled Persian officials, and prepared for war. Xerxes responded with decisive brutality that established his reputation immediately. Unlike his father and grandfather, who often preferred diplomatic solutions and cultural accommodation, the new king demonstrated zero tolerance for rebellion. The Egyptian campaign of 485 BC wasn't just military conquest, but systematic punishment designed to prevent future uprisings. Persian forces didn't simply defeat Egyptian armies, they dismantled the infrastructure of resistance, executed rebel leaders, and imposed harsh tribute requirements that would cripple any future independence movements. The message resonated across the empire. Xerxes wasn't Darius. He wouldn't negotiate with rebels or offer generous terms to defeated enemies. Defiance would be met with overwhelming force and permanent subjugation. Egypt became a cautionary tale written in blood and burned cities. Before the Egyptian dust had settled, Babylon erupted in revolt. The ancient Mesopotamian city represented one of Persia's most prestigious conquests, a jewel in the imperial crown that had maintained special status since Cyrus's original conquest. Babylonian priests continued their traditional ceremonies, Persian kings participated in local religious festivals, and the city retained significant autonomy in exchange for loyalty and tribute. The First Babylonian Rebellion in 484 BC collapsed quickly under Persian assault, but it revealed dangerous cracks in imperial unity. A second uprising 2 years later proved far more serious, requiring a prolonged siege that tested Persian military capabilities and Xerxes' resolve. The rebel leader Shamash-Ariba declared himself king of Babylon, directly challenging Persian legitimacy and inspiring resistance movements across Mesopotamia. When Babylon finally fell after weeks of brutal siege warfare, Xerxes abandoned all pretense of cultural accommodation. He ordered the destruction of Babylon's most sacred sites, including the legendary Temple of Marduk with its priceless religious artifacts. The massive golden statue of the god, which Persian kings had traditionally honored in annual ceremonies, was reportedly melted down and shipped to Persia as raw material. This act of cultural vandalism sent shockwaves throughout the ancient world. Previous Persian rulers had generally respected local religious customs, understanding that cultural tolerance helped maintain political stability. Xerxes chose the opposite approach, demonstrating that rebellion would result not just in military defeat, but cultural annihilation. Babylon's punishment became imperial policy: resist Persia and lose everything that made your civilization unique. The psychological impact extended far beyond Babylon itself. Xerxes stopped using the traditional title King of Babylon in royal inscriptions, instead styling himself as King of the Persians and Medes. The change wasn't merely ceremonial, but represented a fundamental shift in imperial ideology. Rather than ruling over diverse peoples who maintained distinct identities under Persian protection, Xerxes was creating a more centralized system where Persian culture would dominate all others. These early campaigns established the template for everything Xerxes had that followed. Proven himself capable of decisive military action and willing to use extreme measures against those who challenged his authority. The rebellions in Egypt and Babylon weren't just regional conflicts, but tests of imperial will that shaped the king's approach to all future challenges. By 482 BC, internal threats had been eliminated and imperial borders secured. The Persian Empire stood at its zenith of power, controlling more territory and commanding more resources than any previous civilization. Trade routes connected India with the Mediterranean. Persian administrators governed from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, and tribute flowed into royal treasuries from dozens of conquered peoples. Yet one crucial task remained unfinished: Darius's final command echoed through palace corridors and council chambers: punish Athens for its interference in the Ionian revolt. The Greek city-states that had supported Persian rebels nearly 2 decades earlier remained free and defiant, their very existence a challenge to imperial authority and divine mandate. The decision to invade Greece wasn't made lightly or quickly. According to our sources, Xerxes wrestled with the choice for months, alternating between aggressive action and cautious restraint. His closest advisors offered conflicting counsel that reflected the genuine complexity of the strategic situation. Mardonius, the king's cousin and most trusted general, argued passionately for war. The Greeks had humiliated Persia at Marathon, destroyed Persian ships and soldiers, and continued to threaten imperial interests in Asia Minor. More importantly, Greek mainland offered rich agricultural lands and strategic ports that would strengthen Persian control over the eastern Mediterranean. Victory would eliminate a persistent threat while expanding imperial resources. Artabanus, Xerxes' uncle and a veteran advisor who had counseled both Cyrus and Darius, urged caution. The Scythian campaigns had demonstrated the dangers of overextension, and Greek military capabilities had been proven at Marathon. A failed invasion would damage imperial prestige and potentially trigger rebellions among recently conquered peoples who might interpret defeat as divine judgment against Persian rule. The debate raged through council sessions and private consultations, with Xerxes himself changing positions multiple times. But according to ancient accounts, the final decision came not through rational deliberation, but divine intervention that transformed doubt into absolute certainty. The visions that reportedly visited Xerxes during this critical period reveal fascinating insights into ancient Persian religious beliefs and royal psychology. In the first dream, a magnificent figure appeared before the sleeping king, commanding him to lead his armies against Greece and promising victory over all who opposed Persian might. When Xerxes awoke, he interpreted the vision as divine approval for invasion plans. But doubt crept in during daylight hours. The practical challenges seemed overwhelming: organizing the largest military expedition in history, coordinating logistics across thousands of miles, maintaining supply lines through hostile territory, and defeating Greek forces that had already proven their effectiveness against Persian armies. That second night brought another vision, more terrifying than the first. The same divine figure appeared, but now its tone carried unmistakable menace. The entity warned that abandoning the Greek campaign would strip away everything that made Xerxes great, reducing the mighty Persian king to nothing more than a powerless mortal. The threat wasn't subtle. Defy this command and watch your empire crumble, your legacy destroyed, your very identity erased. When dawn broke, Xerxes found himself trapped between human reason and divine terror. The rational mind that had successfully crushed rebellions in Egypt and Babylon now warred against supernatural forces that demanded absolute obedience. But the visions weren't finished with him yet. Seeking confirmation of what he had experienced, Xerxes devised a test that would either validate his dreams or expose them as mere anxiety-induced hallucinations. He summoned Artabanus, his cautious uncle who had opposed the invasion, and made an extraordinary request. The advisor must wear the royal robes, sleep in the royal bed, and see if the same visions would visit him. The experiment produced results that shattered any remaining skepticism. Artabanus experienced identical dreams, complete with divine commands and terrible warnings. The supernatural messenger that had tormented Xerxes now terrorized his uncle, delivering the same ultimatum with even greater intensity. When morning came, the previously cautious advisor had become the invasion's most fervent supporter. This transformation of his most trusted counselor convinced Xerxes that the visions represented genuine divine communication rather than personal delusion. The gods themselves demanded Greek conquest, making resistance not just militarily risky, but spiritually catastrophic. From that moment forward, every fibre of Persian royal authority was committed to the most ambitious military campaign in ancient history, the scale of preparation that followed dwarfed anything previously attempted by human civilization. Xerxes spent 4 full years organizing an expedition that would transport hundreds of thousands of soldiers across continents, support them with supplies gathered from across the known world, and coordinate land and naval forces in perfect synchronization. The logistical challenges alone would have defeated lesser rulers, but the Persian administrative system proved equal to the task. The first obstacle was getting to Greece in one piece. The narrow strait separating Asia from Europe had destroyed Persian plans before, and Xerxes refused to accept similar failure. He commissioned the construction of 2 massive bridges across the Hellespont, engineering marvels that would allow his entire army to march directly from Asia into European territory. When the first attempt failed catastrophically, destroyed by violent storms that swept the bridges away like toys, Xerxes demonstrated the absolute ruthlessness that had crushed rebellions in Egypt and Babylon. The engineers responsible for the failed construction were immediately executed, their deaths serving as both punishment and motivation for their replacements. But the king's fury extended beyond human targets to the natural forces themselves. In an act that perfectly captured both Persian imperial arrogance and Xerxes' personal psychology, he ordered his soldiers to whip the Hellespont 300 times and throw chains into the water as symbols of conquest. The sea itself would learn to obey Persian authority. Waves and currents would bow before royal command, just like human subjects and conquered cities. The rebuilt bridges proved far more durable, constructed with techniques that would influence engineering for centuries afterward. Hundreds of ships were lashed together with massive cables, then covered with wooden planking that created stable roadways capable of supporting cavalry, infantry, and supply wagons. The engineering achievement was so impressive that traces of the construction remained visible for decades after Xerxes' death. While bridge construction proceeded, Persian agents spread across the Mediterranean world, gathering intelligence, securing supplies, and intimidating potential enemies. The diplomatic offensive was nearly as important as military preparation, as Xerxes needed to ensure that his forces could move through neutral territories without constant harassment. Most Greek city-states received Persian ambassadors demanding the traditional tokens of submission, earth and water. These symbolic gifts represented acknowledgement of Persian sovereignty and promises of cooperation during the coming invasion. Cities that complied would be spared destruction and incorporated peacefully into the empire. Those that refused faced the full fury of Persian military might. The psychological warfare proved remarkably effective. Dozens of Greek communities submitted immediately, calculating that resistance meant certain annihilation, while cooperation offered survival and potential prosperity. The Persian diplomatic machine had created an atmosphere of inevitable conquest before a single soldier crossed from Asia to Europe. 2 cities, however, were deliberately excluded from these negotiations. Athens and Sparta received no Persian ambassadors and no opportunities for peaceful submission. Xerxes had marked these states for complete destruction, viewing them as the primary architects of Persian humiliation and the most dangerous obstacles to imperial expansion. Their fate was sealed before the invasion began. The army that finally assembled in Western Asia Minor represented the largest military force ever organized by human civilization. Soldiers arrived from every corner of the Persian Empire, bringing different weapons, languages, and fighting techniques that reflected the incredible diversity of Xerxes' domains. Indians marched alongside Arabs, Scythians fought beside Phoenicians, and Egyptian contingents served under the same banners as troops from the distant mountains of Afghanistan. Ancient sources provide wildly different estimates for the total size of this force, ranging from hundreds of thousands to several million participants. Modern historians generally favor more conservative numbers, but even the most cautious calculations suggest an expedition of unprecedented scale. The logistical requirements alone boggle the mind. Feeding, arming, and transporting such masses across hundreds of miles of difficult terrain while maintaining combat effectiveness and unit cohesion. The diversity of the force was both strength and weakness. Persian military doctrine had always emphasized incorporating the best fighting techniques from conquered peoples, creating combined arms formations that maximize different tactical advantages. Heavy cavalry from the Iranian plateau worked with light infantry from the mountains, while siege specialists from Mesopotamia supported naval forces from Phoenicia and Egypt. But this same diversity created communication challenges, supply complications, and coordination difficulties that would plague the expedition throughout its duration. Commands had to be translated through multiple languages, different units required specialized equipment and rations, and conflicting military traditions sometimes produced confusion rather than tactical innovation. The Persian fleet that accompanied this land army was equally impressive, consisting of vessels from across the Mediterranean world. Phoenician warships renowned for their speed and maneuverability sailed alongside Egyptian transports famous for their cargo capacity. Greek cities that had submitted to Persian authority contributed their own naval contingents, adding local knowledge of coastal waters to Persian numerical superiority. When everything was finally ready in the spring of 480 BC, Xerxes stood at the head of a military machine unlike anything the ancient world had ever witnessed. The bridges across the Hellespont stretched before his army like highways to destiny, connecting Asian power with European conquest. Behind him lay the greatest empire in human history. Ahead waited the Greek city-states that had dared challenge Persian authority and divine mandate. The crossing itself became a spectacle of imperial pageantry designed to demonstrate Persian power to both allies and enemies. The king's personal guard led the procession, their distinctive uniforms and ceremonial weapons gleaming in the morning sun. Behind them came contingents from every corner of the empire, each group wearing traditional dress and carrying ancestral weapons that told the story of Persian conquest and cultural incorporation. Xerxes himself crossed with appropriate ceremony, pausing at the bridge's center to pour libations into the sea and offer prayers to Ahura Mazda for victory over the forces of darkness and chaos. The ritual wasn't merely religious theater, but genuine spiritual preparation for a campaign that the king viewed as cosmic struggle between order and rebellion, light and darkness, divine will and human defiance. The Persian army that set foot on European soil represented more than military expedition. It embodied imperial ideology made manifest. Every soldier carried not just weapons, but the weight of Persian cultural superiority and divine mission. Every step toward Greece advanced the cosmic order that Persian kings were sworn to protect and expand. As the massive force began its march through Thrace toward the Greek heartland, Xerxes could reflect on achievements that already surpassed those of any previous ruler. He had crushed rebellions that threatened imperial unity, organized the largest military expedition in history, and successfully transported this force across natural barriers that had destroyed earlier Persian attempts. The divine visions that had tormented his sleep seemed vindicated by tangible success. Greek resistance, when it came, would face not just superior numbers, but the accumulated weight of imperial confidence built through generations of conquest and expansion. Xerxes wasn't simply another ambitious king seeking territorial gain. He was the earthly representative of divine order itself, backed by resources that dwarfed anything available to his enemies. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine whether Greek independence could survive against Persian imperial might, whether small city-states could resist the largest empire the world had ever known, and whether human courage could triumph over seemingly impossible odds. The real Xerxes was coming, and Greece would never be the same. The advance through Thrace revealed the true scope of Persian ambition and the methodical precision with which Xerxes approached conquest. This wasn't the reckless charge of a hot-blooded warrior seeking glory, but the calculated movement of an imperial machine designed to crush resistance through overwhelming superiority. Every mile of the capabilities that far march demonstrated Persian organizational exceeded anything previously seen in European warfare. Local Thracian tribes faced an impossible choice as this massive force approached their territories: submit immediately and provide supplies, guides, and additional warriors for the Persian cause, or face complete annihilation followed by the enslavement of their entire population. The decision was hardly difficult for most tribal leaders, who quickly calculated that cooperation offered survival while resistance guaranteed extinction. Those few who chose to fight discovered the futility of opposing Persian military might. Entire tribal confederations that had dominated regional politics for generations were swept aside in days of brutal campaigning. The survivors found themselves incorporated into Xerxes' growing army, their warriors forced to march against fellow Europeans, their chiefs reduced to Persian subordinates carrying out imperial commands. This pattern of conquest through intimidation rather than extended warfare served Persian strategic interests perfectly. Every tribe that submitted without fighting preserved Persian strength for the coming battles with Greek city-states, while simultaneously demonstrating to other potential enemies the wisdom of immediate surrender. The psychological effect rippled ahead of the advancing army, creating an atmosphere of inevitable defeat that weakened Greek morale before Persian forces even reached the main theatres of conflict. The engineering achievements that accompanied this advance rivaled the military conquests in their demonstration of Persian capabilities. The canal dug through the Athos Peninsula stood as perhaps the most impressive example of royal determination to overcome natural obstacles through human ingenuity and unlimited resources. Previous Persian expeditions had lost entire fleets attempting to navigate the treacherous waters around this mountainous promontory. But Xerxes refused to accept such limitations. The canal project required moving quantities of earth that staggered contemporary observers, involving thousands of workers laboring for months under Persian supervision to create a navigable waterway where none had existed before. The completed channel allowed Persian naval forces to bypass dangerous coastal waters entirely, demonstrating once again that Persian power extended over natural elements as well as human enemies. Modern archaeological investigations have confirmed the historical reality of this remarkable engineering feat, with aerial photography revealing traces of ancient excavation that match classical descriptions of Xerxes' canal. The discovery provides tangible evidence that Persian capabilities were every bit as impressive as ancient sources claimed, validating accounts that seemed too extraordinary to be credible. Meanwhile, Greek preparations for the coming storm revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of their fragmented political system. Unlike the Persian Empire, where a single royal command could mobilize resources from India to Egypt, Greek resistance required complex negotiations between independent city-states that jealously guarded their autonomy and frequently prioritized local interests over collective survival. The Congress of Corinth in 481 BC represented an unprecedented achievement in Greek diplomacy, bringing together dozens of city-states that had spent generations fighting each other over territorial disputes, commercial rivalries, and political disagreements. The Persian threat was so overwhelming that traditional enemies agreed to set aside their feuds and coordinate military responses under unified command structures. Yet even this remarkable cooperation had severe limitations. Many Greek communities remained convinced that submission offered better prospects than resistance, calculating that Persian rule might prove more tolerable than destruction in hopeless warfare. Others simply lacked the military resources to contribute meaningfully to collective defense, while some harbored such deep grudges against neighboring cities that they preferred Persian conquest to Greek unity. The result was a coalition that included the most powerful Greek military forces, but excluded significant portions of the Greek world. Persian diplomats had been remarkably successful in their campaigns to secure neutral or friendly territories, leaving the resistance movement geographically isolated and numerically inferior to the forces gathering against them. Athens found itself in the unique position of being Xerxes' primary target. while simultaneously serving as the resistance movement's most crucial participant. The Athenian fleet, originally built for conflicts with neighboring city-states, now represented Greece's best hope for challenging Persian naval supremacy. Athenian leadership, forged through decades of democratic political competition, provided strategic thinking that complemented Spartan military excellence. Sparta's role in the resistance was equally critical, but reflected very different cultural values and military traditions. Where Athenians emphasized flexibility, innovation, and collective decision-making, Spartans brought rigid discipline, professional military expertise, and a warrior ethos that viewed death in battle as the highest possible honor. The cultural differences between these two leading cities created both opportunities and tensions within the Greek alliance. Athenian naval expertise complemented Spartan land forces perfectly, providing the coalition with capabilities across multiple theaters of warfare. But Athenian democracy clashed with Spartan authoritarianism, while Athenian commercial interests sometimes conflicted with Spartan agricultural values. As Xerxes approached the Greek heartland, these internal divisions would be tested by the ultimate pressure of survival against impossible odds. The Persian king commanded resources that dwarfed anything available to his enemies, possessed military experience gained through successful campaigns across 3 continents, and carried divine mandate that justified any level of destruction necessary to achieve victory. The first major confrontation would occur at a narrow coastal pass called Thermopylae, where geography offered the Greeks their best opportunity to neutralize Persian numerical superiority. The Hot Gates, as this passage was known, provided a defensive position where small numbers of determined warriors might hold off vastly larger forces, at least temporarily. King Leonidas of Sparta understood that this battle would likely be his last, but he also recognized its strategic importance in the broader campaign for Greek survival. If Persian forces could be delayed at Thermopylae, other Greek armies would have time to organize more comprehensive defensive positions further south. If the pass fell quickly, Xerxes would have a clear route into central Greece and access to Athens itself. The Spartan king wasn't fighting alone, despite later mythological accounts that emphasized his 300 warriors as solitary heroes. Approximately 7,000 Greek soldiers from multiple city-states had gathered at Thermopylae, including contingents from Thebes, Thespiae, and various other communities that had committed themselves to resistance despite overwhelming odds. The battle that followed would become legendary not because of its military outcome, which was never really in doubt, but because of what it revealed about the collision between 2 completely different approaches to warfare and political organization. Persian forces relied on overwhelming numerical superiority, coordinated attacks by diverse ethnic contingents, and the assumption that sheer scale would eventually break any defensive position. Greek tactics emphasized intensive training of individual warriors, intimate knowledge of local terrain, and the psychological advantages that came from fighting for homeland and family, rather than distant imperial ambitions. The narrow pass at Thermopylae maximized these Greek advantages while minimizing Persian strengths, creating conditions where superior numbers became irrelevant and individual combat skills determined outcomes. For 3 days, the impossible happened. Greek defensive positions held against wave after wave of Persian assaults, inflicting casualties far out of proportion to their own losses, and demonstrating that Persian forces weren't invincible despite their impressive reputation. Xerxes himself reportedly watched the fighting from a throne positioned on nearby hills, growing increasingly frustrated as his elite units failed to break through Greek lines. The Persian king had expected this battle to be a formality, a brief delay before continuing his march toward Athens, an ultimate victory over European resistance. Instead, he found himself witnessing the systematic destruction of some of his finest warriors by a small force of Greeks fighting with desperate courage and superior tactical positioning. The psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. Persian soldiers who had participated in victorious campaigns across Asia and Africa now faced enemies who refused to break despite impossible odds. Greek warriors who had grown up hearing stories about Persian invincibility discovered that these legendary opponents could bleed and die like any other men. But geography and numbers eventually told their decisive story. A local Greek named Ephialtes, seeking Persian gold or perhaps nursing grievances against his own community, revealed the existence of a mountain path that allowed Persian forces to circle around the main Greek defensive positions. This flanking maneuver transformed a successful defense into an inevitable disaster. When Leonidas realized that his position had been compromised, he faced a choice that would define his legacy for millennia. He could order a general retreat that would preserve most of his forces for future battles, or he could organize a fighting withdrawal that would give other Greek units time to escape while sacrificing his own command. The decision reflected both Spartan military values and the broader strategic requirements of Greek resistance. The king chose sacrifice. While most Greek contingents withdrew in good order to fight another day, Leonidas and his 300 Spartans remained behind to form a rear guard that would delay Persian pursuit as long as possible. They were joined by 700 Thespians who refused to abandon their Spartan allies, and by 400 Thebans whose cities' loyalty to the Greek cause remained questionable. The final phase of the battle at Thermopylae became a massacre, but it was a massacre with purpose. Every hour that Leonidas and his warriors held their positions was another hour for Greek armies further south to prepare defensive positions and coordinate their resistance efforts. The tactical defeat at Thermopylae contributed to strategic advantages that would prove crucial in subsequent battles. When the last Greek warrior fell, Xerxes had achieved his immediate objective of clearing the pass and opening the route toward Athens, but the victory had cost him more than anticipated in terms of both casualties and psychological impact. His supposedly invincible army had been held up for days by a tiny fraction of Greek forces, raising uncomfortable questions about Persian military superiority and the viability of the entire invasion plan. More importantly, the battle had provided Greek resistance with its first genuine hero and a propaganda victory that would inspire continued opposition despite seemingly hopeless odds. Leonidas had transformed military defeat into moral triumph, proving that Greek courage could match Persian resources when properly applied under favorable circumstances. The simultaneous naval battle at Artemisium demonstrated similar patterns, with Greek fleets using superior seamanship and knowledge of local waters to inflict disproportionate casualties on Persian naval forces. While the Greeks eventually withdrew from this position as well, they had proven that Persian naval superiority wasn't absolute and that continued resistance remained feasible despite numerical disadvantages. As Persian forces advanced toward Athens following their victories at Thermopylae and Artemisium, Xerxes could reflect on achievements that fulfilled his father's commands while simultaneously revealing unexpected complexities in the campaign for Greek conquest. He had broken through the primary Greek defensive positions, eliminated their most famous warrior king, and opened the route to his ultimate target. Yet the easy victory that Persian planning had anticipated was proving more costly and time-consuming than expected. Greek resistance showed no signs of collapsing, despite defeats that should have shattered their morale, while Persian casualties were mounting at rates that threatened to weaken the imperial army's effectiveness in future battles. The march toward Athens would test whether Xerxes could maintain the momentum gained through his victories at Thermopylae and Artemisium, or whether Greek defensive strategies would continue to extract unacceptable costs from Persian forces. The real test of the invasion was just beginning, and the outcome would determine whether Persian imperial power could successfully extend its dominion over European territories. The burning of Athens in September 480 BC represented the fulfillment of Persian royal vows that stretched back nearly 2 decades to the Ionian Revolt. When Xerxes' forces entered the largely abandoned city and put torch to its most sacred buildings, they were completing a mission of vengeance that had shaped Persian policy since his father's reign. The smoke rising from the Acropolis carried symbolic weight that extended far beyond immediate military significance. Yet this apparent triumph contained seeds of strategic disaster that would soon transform Persian victory into comprehensive defeat. The empty city that burned so dramatically had been evacuated not in panic, but as part of a calculated Greek strategy designed to preserve human resources while sacrificing. The icing material Posathenians who watched their homeland burn from nearby islands weren't demoralized refugees, but determined resistance fighters preparing for the next phase of their campaign. The evacuation of Athens revealed a level of strategic thinking that caught Persian commanders completely off guard. This wasn't the desperate flight of a defeated population, but a carefully orchestrated withdrawal designed to preserve the most valuable military asset any ancient city possessed: its trained fighting men. While buildings could be rebuilt and treasures replaced, experienced warriors represented irreplaceable resources that required years of training and combat experience to develop properly. Themistocles, the brilliant Athenian naval commander who had orchestrated this bold strategy, understood that traditional siege warfare favored defenders who could force attackers to exhaust themselves against fortified positions. But he also recognized that Persian resources were so overwhelming that even the strongest walls would eventually fall to sustained assault. The solution was to abandon fixed defenses entirely and transform the conflict into a mobile campaign where Greek advantages in seamanship and local knowledge could offset Persian numerical superiority. The psychological impact of this decision on Persian leadership cannot be overstated. Xerxes had expected to find a city full of terrified civilians begging for mercy, providing him with the spectacular triumph that would validate his divine mission and justify the enormous costs of the invasion. Instead, he discovered empty buildings and silent streets that offered no satisfaction for royal vengeance and no clear indication of Greek intentions. The king's frustration manifested in the systematic destruction of Athens's most sacred sites, including the Parthenon and other temples that represented the heart of Athenian religious and cultural identity. These acts of cultural vandalism served multiple purposes. They fulfilled Persian vows of punishment, while simultaneously demonstrating to other Greek cities the fate awaiting those who continued resistance against imperial authority. But the burning of Athens also revealed dangerous limitations in Persian strategic thinking. The campaign had been planned as a traditional conquest that would culminate in the occupation of enemy territory and the subjugation of hostile populations. When the Greeks refused to cooperate with these expectations by remaining in their cities to be conquered, Persian forces found themselves controlling empty real estate, while their actual enemies remained free to continue fighting from secure bases. The naval concentration around Salamis presented Xerxes with his next major strategic challenge. Greek fleets had withdrawn to the narrow waters between the island and the mainland, creating a defensive position that maximized their tactical advantages while minimizing Persian strengths. The confined space prevented Persian commanders from deploying their full numerical superiority effectively, while Greek knowledge of local currents and wind patterns provided crucial advantages in maneuvering. Persian naval doctrine emphasized overwhelming force applied through coordinated attacks by large formations of warships from across the empire. Phoenician vessels renowned for their speed worked alongside Egyptian transports and Greek ships from cities that had submitted to Persian authority. The diversity of the fleet reflected imperial strength, but also created coordination challenges that would prove decisive in the coming battle. Queen Artemisia of Caria, one of Xerxes' most trusted naval commanders and the only woman leading forces in the Persian fleet, reportedly advised against immediate assault on the Greek positions at Salamis. Her counsel reflected sound strategic thinking. Persian forces could establish a blockade around the Greek fleet and wait for internal divisions to break apart the enemy alliance naturally. Time favored Persian resources and logistics, while prolonged confinement in cramped quarters would strain Greek morale and supplies. But Xerxes rejected this cautious approach in favor of decisive action that would demonstrate Persian power and bring the campaign to a rapid conclusion. The king's confidence was understandable, given his recent victories and the apparent desperation of Greek defensive positions. His forces had broken through every obstacle the Greeks had placed in their path, eliminated their most famous warriors, and captured their most important city. One final push should complete the conquest and establish Persian dominion over European territories. The Battle of Salamis in late September 480 BC shattered these expectations with devastating finality. Persian naval forces that entered the narrow straits found themselves trapped in confined waters where their numerical superiority became a liability rather than an advantage. Ships collided with each other while trying to maneuver. Formations dissolved into chaos as commanders lost control of their units, and Greek vessels used superior seamanship to devastating effect. The man who claimed divine mandate over the known world ended his invasion in ignominious retreat. His massive fleet scattered beneath the waters of Salamis, and his dreams of European conquest reduced to burning wreckage. The real Xerxes wasn't the invincible god-king of legend, but a mortal ruler who discovered the hard limits of imperial power when confronted by enemies willing to sacrifice everything for freedom. His legacy stands as both monument to Persian achievement and warning about the dangers of absolute authority unchecked by wisdom or restraint.